At the Nestlé Nutrition Institute, we have one clear vision: to bring nutrition science to life through the people who live it. Connecting a world of healthcare providers, generating discussion and encouraging relevant conversations. NNI believes that the more we promote and grow the understanding of nutrition today, the more we can shape the science of tomorrow. So, we foster and disseminate nutrition research to a global audience, sharing a premium range of resources, offering both scientific and practical information, which is available anytime, anywhere, and covering everything from the first 1,000 days to healthy aging, from cutting-edge science through to sustainable nutrition, to actively establish deeper, more meaningful dialogue, inspired by your needs, fueled by your desire to be at the forefront of scientific thinking, and ultimately, to help you in your professional life. Everything we do is built around you to help bring nutrition science to life through the people who live it. NNI, advancing science for better nutrition.
Early nutrition and feeding is an integral component of parenting that encompasses the social, cultural, and economic structure of a parent's life. Understanding the current modifiable determinants influencing parents' feeding choices and behaviors is essential in providing support and education. What we all know is that there are universal challenges for parents, no matter where in the world you're raising your children. Healthcare professionals are the preferred source on parenting advice. Your role in education and support is key to empower parents to adopt recommended infant feeding and to give advice on the critical behavioral aspects that go along with it. The goal of this webinar, organized by the Nestlé Nutrition Institute, is to understand deeper the realities parents face today and to discuss the important role of healthcare professionals in finding solutions to better support parents on their journey in the current challenging reality of the world we live in today. This webinar will cover the following 3 topics. In the first lecture, titled Hidden Realities in Infant Feeding, the Importance of Listening to Parents, Professor Stuart Forsyth will discuss the results of a systematic review on parents' attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions regarding infant feeding and the importance of listening to parents and reaching solutions that may mitigate some of their unfortunate experiences. It is a pleasure to introduce Professor Stuart Forsyth, who previously acted as a consultant pediatrician with responsibilities for neonatal services in Tayside in Scotland. He's held positions of the Clinical Group Director for Women and Children's Services and was appointed Medical Director of the NHS in Tayside. For several years, he was the National Advisor to the Scottish Government on Child Health Services and has often been an invited external reviewer of maternal, obstetrics and neonatal services by the United Kingdom and Scottish Government. He has a long-standing record of research interest in infant and child nutrition and holds an honorary professorship from the University of Dundee in Scotland. For many years, he has had a research interest in the role of long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids in infant and child health. But more recently, he has published on global aspects of policy, practice, and politics of infant and child nutrition. The second lecture will be given by Professor Ming Cui. She will talk about the Parenting Index, understanding the challenges and opportunities of better supporting parents. Today, the Parenting Index, which was commissioned by Nestlé as part of its ongoing commitment to support families in the first 1,000 days, is a unique new way of benchmarking and understanding the experiences of parents across the world, reflecting the views of 8,000 moms and dads of babies aged 0 to 12 months across 16 countries globally. It is a pleasure to introduce Professor Ming Cui, who is a Fulbright Scholar in the U.S. and Professor of Family and Child Sciences at Florida State University. With a master's in statistics and a doctorate in sociology, Professor Cui has expertise in parenting and child development across cultures and specializes in understanding research methodology. Her current research interests are child emotional and behavioral development, parenting frameworks, family relationships, cultural diversity, and statistical modeling. In the third lecture, we will have esteemed Professor Rubens Pfefferbaum discussing the role of each of us, the role of healthcare professionals on scaling up nutrition and behavioral education that supports parents during infant feeding. Professor Pfefferbaum is a pediatric assistant at the Children's Institute of Medical School at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. He also holds a doctorate degree in pediatrics from the University of Sao Paulo and is a neonatologist who specializes in nutrition. With more than 40 years' experience in pediatrics in the private clinic settings, working on a daily basis to support and educate parents and their children, he will bring his expertise and his knowledge to the lecture today. His key areas of interest are pediatric nutrition and neonatal intensive care nutrition, parenteral and enteral nutrition, nutrition for the very low birth weight infant, and understanding the concepts of immunonutrition and energy. As you can see, it's a robust agenda with esteemed speakers to both inform, educate, and delight us on how all of us can play a better role in helping our patients today and tomorrow. Thank you so much, and we hope you will enjoy and learn from the expertise and experience of the speakers, with the final objective, which is common for all of us, to support parents' feeding choices and behaviors. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Ming Cui. I'm a Fulbright U.S. scholar and a professor of family and child science at Florida State University. My topic is the Parenting Index, understanding the challenges and opportunities of better supporting parents today. This is an overview of my presentation today. The first topic, what is the Parenting Index? The next question follows that, what are the factors influencing the parenting index? Having looked at the parenting index and the contributing factors, we want to understand what rationale behind them, how to interpret what we found. Finally, what are the practical implications for parents as well as healthcare professionals? What can we do to support parents today? As the Parenting Index report puts it, the purpose of this effort is to measure parenting, then to understand parenting, and finally to influence and lead practice to make parenting easier. What is the Parenting Index? Well, what is parenting? Parenting is the act of raising a child, which involves protecting, nurturing, and teaching a child to become an independent and responsible adult. From a historical lens, parenting has changed throughout the history, evolving from providing minimal care and education and not keeping close emotional ties in ancient Greece and Rome, to providing intensive care, investing heavily in education, and maintaining strong relationship ties since the 20th century. The parenting framework defines a typology of 4 parenting styles within 2 dimensions, ranging from warm and structured to rejecting and uninvolved parenting. But the traditional parenting framework has faced some critiques over time. Some of these critiques are actually quite relevant to today's topic, such as this theoretical framework's inability to capture the phenomena of modern parenting, as well as cultural variations. Leading the effort in the field, the Parenting Index is initiated by Nestle as part of its ongoing commitment to support families in their first 1,000 days, with the aims to understand the experience of parenting in the current society, to capture the complexity of the modern parenting reality, and to inform policies and practice to support today's parents from across the globe. The methodology was developed and executed by Kantar. Data collection involved interviews and survey questionnaires from over 8,000 parents of babies from birth to 12 months old from 16 countries in 4 continents. The Parenting Index was eventually built from 3 simple questions covering the social, emotional, and economic aspects. All things considered, would you agree that being a parent today is easy? Parenting today is full of challenges I cannot control. All in all, I feel supported in my role as a parent. It is rated on the index of 0 to 100, with a higher score indicator indicating better experience in parenting. The results suggest that the parenting index range from a score of 39 in China to a score of 75 in Sweden. What are the factors influencing the parenting index? How do parents from different countries perceive their parenting? And what explains the parenting experience? The results from factor analysis suggested 8 factors on the individual level that could contribute to higher scores in the parenting index. Low external and internal pressure, financial resilience, supports for a working life, an easy baby, access to health and well-being resources, a supportive environment, shared parenting, and parenting confidence. They also found 3 factors on the societal level: maternity leave duration, the GDP, and the Gini coefficient. Altogether, they identify 11 factors, as shown in the pie chart from the report. Now, how do we understand the parenting index and the influencing factors? From a socio-ecological perspective, parenting is affected by a variety of factors on multiple layers surrounding parenting. On the macro layer, a parent's parenting beliefs and behaviors are shaped by their socioeconomic status and the policies in that particular country. Factors in this layer include the 3 external factors, as well as the pressure from the society. On the exo and meso layers, a parent's workplace and the family's immediate environment are crucial for parenting. These include factors like family work balance, access to healthcare and resources, and a supportive environment. On the micro level, a parent's co-parenting support, parenting beliefs and efficacy, a family's financial situation, and the temperament and well-being of the baby all contribute to the variations in parenting, which are factors like shared parenting, internalized pressure, parenting confidence, family financial resilience, and having an easy baby. On the chrono level, a parent's parenting is bounded by that particular historical time, which is currently modern parenting. The cultural ecological perspective also offers a unique lens looking into the cultural similarities and difference. The debate of approaching cross-cultural phenomena with a cultural invariant view versus with a cultural specific view is ongoing. This report finds both commonalities and difference in parenting across countries. For example, financial challenges are shared by parents from India, the Philippines, and Nigeria, and lack of parenting confidence and workplace support resonated among parents from the UK, Germany, and the US. Such results suggest an integration of cultural universalism with cultural relativism. Taken together, the findings of this report have their roots in established theories and are also consistent with most research evidence. Now, with that knowledge, what can we do to support today's parents and to make parenting easier? Healthcare professionals are an important part of this action. First is to educate parents the developmental needs of babies. Healthcare professionals could provide information on the main tasks of parenting babies, which include establishing a feeding pattern, maintaining a sleep-wake cycle, promoting brain development, and forming emotional attachment. For example, healthcare professionals could educate parents the importance of a secure emotional bond between a baby and a primary caregiver, which is critical and affects the baby's emotional, physical, social, and psychological well-being beyond infancy and well into adulthood. Because of the nature and the degree of dependency in infancy, healthcare professionals should advocate for responsive and responsible parenting during this developmental period. As much as we know that parents need to be responsive and responsible, it is also important to realize that when it comes to specific parenting behavior, there is no one-size-fits-all best parenting practice. Because parenting is a social construct and parent is a developmental role. Parenting behavior changes over time in response to social norms and the developmental needs of the child. So what's best 50 years ago may not be best now. And what's ideal for a 2-week-old baby is not necessarily ideal for a 12-month-old baby. And what's preferred in a collectivistic culture might not be the case in an individualistic culture. Related to this report, it depends on the various factors we just discussed. So there is no one universally applied best parenting practice. Healthcare professionals could also help parents to avoid the hyperparenting trap. Now, today's parents are increasingly parenting in a state of anxiety, which can be reflected from findings in this report, such as the external and internal pressure. Influenced by popular media along with technology advances, many parents today across different cultures and socioeconomic classes feel pressure to do it all, such as being a supermom. In these parents' mind, being average is not good enough, and to do anything less would imply negligence. Such emerging trend had led many modern parents to practice what family scholars call hyperparenting, which, even with the best intention from the parents, is not regarded as a good parenting practice. So healthcare professionals could play a role to inform and guide parents to avoid such parenting trap. Taking on a systemic approach, parents' own well-being affects their parenting and their baby's development. Now, some parents may not realize that their own well-being matters in the process of parenting. Parenting babies with the elevated demands and stress can take a toll on parents themselves, financially, emotionally, and physically. Consequently, some overworked, overwhelmed, and over-the-top parents could transfer their negativity into their parenting behavior, such as the practice of uninvolved, neglectful, withdrawn, or hostile parenting. To promote positive parenting and ultimately baby's healthy development, healthcare professionals could help parents to attend to their own needs, such as leaving empty space on their calendar and taking a break, so to avoid feeling depleted, exhausted, drained, and burned out. Finally, the findings from this report have practical implications for parents, practitioners, educators, partners in the business and service sector, as well as in the community and policymakers across cultures. For example, policymakers from some countries could consider extending maternity leave policy. From this report, it shows that parents in Brazil face some of the greatest challenge regarding maternity leave. Another point is to recognize the need and the importance of parenting education. And one of the most salient relationships among humans is the one between a parent and a child. Yet the need for formal parenting education is severely undervalued. For example, in the US, other than special circumstances such as foster parenting, there's no state or federal statute that requires a parenting education for parents to become parents, even though the stakes are high and the effects are long-lasting. In recent years, it's good to see more parenting programs, especially evidence programs, are emerging. For parenting programs, there could be some basic and common elements, such as how to deal with internal and external pressure, which is found in this report to affect parents across cultures. On the other hand, some program element could be tailored to fit the particular country's need. For instance, even though parents from several Western countries, such as the UK, US, Sweden, and Germany, demonstrated strong financial resilience, they reported low level of parenting confidence. So parenting program in these countries could target on building parenting efficacy, such that specific parenting education program could target different aspects of parenting. With this parenting index report, we gain a better understanding of the challenge and opportunities of parenting. That parenting is not an isolated behavior. It is not defined by some rigid rules. It is not solely the parent or the family's own matter. Instead, parenting is rooted in the broader society, shaped by many factors and changes over time. Yes, indeed, it takes a village to raise a child, and healthcare professionals can be a big part of this collective effort. Together, let's find ways to make parenting practice easier and better for parents from diverse cultural backgrounds of the 21st century. This concludes my presentation today, and I thank all of you for taking an interest in this important matter.
Thank you for the invitation to contribute to this webinar on understanding parenting today. Parenting presents many challenges, and I'm going to discuss one of the earliest, which is agreeing an infant feeding plan that meets the needs of the infant and with which the parents feel reassured and confident in delivering. Despite it being universally acknowledged that all infants should be breastfed from birth, the WHO targets for exclusive and continued breastfeeding rates clearly are not being met. With the driver for breastfeeding being to support the health and well-being of the infant, it is inevitable that parental decisions on initiation or cessation of breastfeeding may generate deep emotional and psychological dilemmas for mothers. From the data on non-compliance with WHO recommendations, it is postulated that there are many mothers who may consider that their infant feeding experience was highly sensitive, emotional, and potentially traumatic. This presentation begins by briefly describing our recent systematic review of parent attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions regarding infant feeding, and considers how the parental voice of reason can make a valuable contribution to defining a more sensitive and rewarding infant feeding experience for families. The study was a collaboration between colleagues from Nestlé Nutrition and contributors from Brazil, United Kingdom, and China, and was published in the journal Behavioral Sciences in April 2020. The aim of the study was to provide a comprehensive synthesis of original qualitative data that informed on parent attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions with regard to infant feeding, and also to identify factors that influence parent-infant feeding decisions, and to include just recent studies published between 2015 and 2019 to provide current parent perspectives of infant feeding. The systematic review follows standard recommendations, and following the initial search and assessment process, 73 papers were included in the review. More than half of the studies were published in the past 3 years. A majority, 82%, of the studies were conducted with parents from North America, Europe, United Kingdom, and Australia. A limited number of studies included parents from Asia or Africa, and the data was obtained from focus groups and interviews. You'll see the number of papers and international distribution of these papers indicate that parent attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions relating to infant feeding are of global interest and also of concern. The key findings from the systematic review were as follows. The evidence indicates that there are many mothers who feel overwhelmed, anxious, and frustrated with the intensity and unpredictability of breastfeeding, and found that breastfeeding was demanding, not as easy as it should seem, and required perseverance. Many mothers who breastfed reported negative feelings of judgment from others, and several identified stigma, shame, and personal embarrassment to feeding in public. There are also mothers who exclusively breastfed or breastfed for longer durations than typical for their culture, who have high internal perceptions of confidence and determination with their breastfeeding decision. And despite challenges, they reach their goals. Alternatively, there were many mothers that could not or elected not to breastfeed, particularly for the duration they intended, and they reported feelings of shame, guilt, or stigma. The idealism that breastfeeding was representative of a good mother, not surprisingly, created conflict and raised discussion on a woman's self-perception of what it means to be a good mother. Overall, the influence of a mother's immediate family or her infant feeding decisions behaviors had a strong impact, but advice from family was often contradictory to nutrition-based feeding guidelines. Similarly, family, tradition, and culture shape parental infant feeding beliefs and perceptions on the introduction of complementary feeding. Finally, a need for strategies and support that address parents' personal, cultural, and ideological constraints with infant feeding were identified in several studies. To support this qualitative data from our systematic review, this paper by Fallon and colleagues provides quantitative data from a study undertaken in the United Kingdom. And this gives an indication of the potential magnitude of emotional and psychological burden that can be associated with infant feeding choices. If we look at the column headed EBF to EFF, you will see that 79% of the participants who changed from exclusive breastfeeding to exclusive formula feeding experienced feelings of guilt, and they also, 75%, experienced feelings of being stigmatized. If we look at the column EFF, you will see that the feelings of guilt were less, with 45% of participants feeling that sensation, whereas a very high level of stigmatization was maintained in this group. The main source of guilt and stigma were from other mothers, health professionals, and also what they read on the internet. Both groups reported that the majority of mothers needed to defend their choice of feeding. But interestingly, you will see that in the exclusive formula feeding group, the vast majority of mothers were satisfied or very satisfied with their decision to formula feed, whereas in the exclusive breastfeeding to exclusive formula feeding group, the feelings of satisfaction were less convincing. The first 1,000 days, which refers to the period from conception to 2 years of age, is recognized as a critical time for nutrition, growth, and development. And this underlines the importance of infants receiving the right food at the right time during this period. There is a universal consensus regarding the right food, but issues relating to the right time are heavily debated and been in conflict over several decades. And this has led to inconsistent messages for parents. In infant feeding policymaking, there is an increasing tension between idealistic and realistic approach. The left column represents the WHO recommendations that are currently in operation today, and the right column reflects WHO recommendations that existed pre-WHO infant feeding strategy that was published in 2003. The dilemma is that does more ambitious idealistic approach leads to significant health gain, but risks less compliance, or does a more realistic approach provide less health gain, but achieve greater compliance? Or is there a middle ground with components from each of the approach forming a middle road that makes acceptable exceptions on both health gain and compliance? Ideally, this would be tested by an RCT, but randomizing mothers and their infants to different durations of breastfeeding presents ethical considerations. There is therefore depends upon observational studies, which are subject to confounding variables, and interpretation of data is then subject to individual opinion and consequently mixed messages for parents. To achieve a resolution that could possibly enable a consensus of opinion, effective engagement with all of the key groups is essential. Effective policy requires transparency and accessibility to as wide a range of citizens as possible. It's important to reach out beyond the usual suspects, to avoid the risk of policy being hijacked by the vociferous few, and to communicate with the silent majority. Compliance with infant feeding policy requires consensus from parents, and consensus from parents requires consultation with parents. Consultation with parents needs to be a two-way exchange, with parents hopefully learning from you and you always learning from them. It is critically important not to underestimate the natural instincts and common sense of parents. And this is especially relevant in the management of nutritional health and well-being of their infants and children. Parental intuition and unconscious reasoning needs to be balanced against the conscious reasoning contained within official guidance for policy and practice. It is also important to appreciate that health messages need to be proportionate and receptive to the target audience. If inappropriately delivered, health messages can result in the target audience adopting behaviours opposite of the recommended action. The theoretical framework for this boomerang reaction has been called psychological reactions theory, which was described in 1966. Recent studies involving young adults showing that highly explicit directive language is often viewed as controlling may contribute to higher levels of psychological reactions and thus higher levels of anger and a negative perception of the credibility of the source. The use of more implicit autonomy supporting and encouraging language has been shown to diminish reactance arousal. More implicit messages using qualifier terms such as perhaps, possibly, and maybe reduce levels of reactance, whereas language that is controlling may include forceful verbs such as ought, must, and should. It is noted that in the WHO code, should is mentioned 96 times, and perhaps, possibly, and maybe are not mentioned. An interesting example of psychological reactions relates to recent changes in the definition of breast milk substitute. The term breast milk substitute was created by policymakers and is ignored by parents. I've consulted with thousands of parents over the last 30 or more years, and not once has a parent said to me, "Oh, by the way, doctor, I've started my child on a breast milk substitute." Breast milk substitute is defined in the code as any food being marketed or otherwise presented as partial or total replacement for breast milk, whether or not suitable for that purpose. In 2016, WHO stated that a breast milk substitute should be understood to include any milks or products that could be used to replace milk, such as a fortified soy milk, in either liquid or powdered form, that are specifically marketed for feeding infants and young children up to the age of 3 years, including follow-up formula and growing up milks. This new statement from WHO certainly meets some of the criteria for psychological reactions, with commanding language should be understood. The validity of the statement is dependent upon WHO recommending that mothers should breastfeed for 3 years. And for many mothers, this will resurrect their feelings of guilt and stigmatization, and in some feelings of anger. WHO stated that this is not a change to the definition, but it is a clarification. These are extracts from letters published in a UK national newspaper, and they represent the opposite ends of parental perception in relation to their experience of infant feeding. The first relates to a mother who had difficulty in maintaining breastfeeding and had support from a lactation consultant to whom the letter was addressed. The second extract was from a female doctor and mother of 4 children who encouraged mothers to do what they think is best for their child. I felt incompetent. I didn't have much time to enjoy him. My milk supply didn't increase. So I quit breastfeeding. Today, I'm a happy stay-at-home mum who spends my days feeding my baby, playing with him, doing his laundry, reading to him, and enjoying him. The long days at home as my baby's primary caregiver did give me the time I needed to figure things out. And for me, that meant switching to a bottle. I don't regret it. And then we have the view. Making personal choices on rational grounds is part of being an adult, and definitely part of being a parent. Perhaps sensible mums will check out the pros and cons, ignore the pressure groups, and do merchants. Face the realities of the situation, stop being bullied by ideas of perfection, and just get on with it. And so from this presentation, I believe there are a number of potential messages from parents to policymakers that have been identified. Policies need to be viewed by parents as achievable. What is achievable will differ across families. The psychosocial consequences of overreaching targets are not only a disincentive, but may also be physically and emotionally harmful. The extremes of idealistic, wishful thinking and the harsh reality of coping with a newborn infant need to be coalesced into workable solutions for individual families. A balanced incremental approach to policy and practice may allow the development of a greater sense of ownership and confidence, mitigate the sense of overwhelming pressure and failure, and redefine what is a successful breastfeeding experience. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I want to thank Nestlé Nutrition Institute for the kind invitation. And our subject today is the role of healthcare providers, scale-up nutrition, and behavioral education that support parents during infant feeding. This is my disclosure. And of course, when we think in the 1,000 days that define the child's future health, this is very important period in the cycle of the life. Because the nutrition in the first 1,000 days has a critical influence on their immediate and long-term physical and cognitive development. The period of the first year of life characterizes a unique moment in which parents or caregivers make essentially all dietary decisions on what and how to feed the infant. Of course, the 1,000 days have a lot of problems, and one of that is lack of food. Unfortunately, this occurs in many countries in the world, more than 200 million infants, and this is worse now during the pandemic from COVID-19. But on the other hand, is another important point, because infants and in early childhood growth is directly influenced by food habits. Children gain more weight during the first years of life. They have more risk from overweight and comes with this all the life. Then we must pay attention for these 2 important points from the 1,000 days. Of course, breastfeeding is the gold standard for infants, and every effort must do to have the long time as we can. The recommendation from World Health Organization is for more than 2 years. But 2, unfortunately, is what not seen in many countries in the world. Many mothers cannot give breastfeed to their children for this recommendation, and this is a problem too. Maybe a problem for work, maybe a problem for guides, maybe a problem for the wrong introduction, the complementary food, for example. Complementary infant feeding is another issue. We have a lot of guidelines from World Health Organization, from Pan American Health Organization in Latin America, in Brazil, from Brazilian Society of Pediatrics, and the European ESPGHAN organization. What they recommend? They recommend to adequate protein calorie needs, adequacy of minerals and micronutrients, and when start or introduce the complementary infant feeding. Well, in Latin America and Brazil, we follow the World Health Organization recommendations. Exclusive mom milk until 6 months and only introduce complementary feeding after the 6 months. ESPGHAN has a range between not before 70 weeks and not after 26 weeks. And this we must give to the children a mix of fruit, vegetables, greens, meat, eventually with complementation with iron, even in breastfeed mothers, breastfeed children, vitamin D, and all the guides to transition to consistency to solid food or the family foods for more than 10 months or 1 year old. The complementary food is very important because we have a lot of micronutrients deficiencies if we not follow the guides. One of the most important is the anemia. This is a worldwide problem for millions and millions of children, but in Brazil, this is a huge problem. As we can see, more than 50% children less than 2 years have anemia, have low levels of hemoglobin that can affect the cognitive development and the child health. And an important issue that is the center of this talk is what's the role of the nutrition education in all these matters during especially the 1,000 days. Well, we have a lot of recommendation during pregnancy, for example, to optimize maternal health and lifestyle in preparation for pregnancy. Before pregnancy, some obstetrician said that it is not 1,000 days, it's 1,100 days, because this 100 days before pregnancy, we must give folate, DAG, for example, adjust the future pregnant weight, fighting against malnutrition as obesity or undernutrition. It's important in this period we have, and after birth, give guides to breastfed and complementary foods, as we see before, and have good recommendations in lifestyle to provide the infant toddler opportunities for physical activity, have a good environment, have a good opportunity to have adequate sleep, have a good health, a good mental health during his stay in home or during the school. But what are the parent perspectives, especially of infant feeding? Well, in this paper, recently published, we can see that parents, they think that breastfeeding is best for an infant. Otherwise, there are distinct attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions of mothers that breastfeeding and those that could not or should not to breastfeed are evident. This is for many reasons, as work, as the shape, image, for example. But the majority of mothers, they want to be excellent mothers and give breastfeeds. Infant feeding behaviors are influenced by the social-cultural environment of the family, the nucleus of the family, the friends, and now we have the internet. Then the parents, what they expect from the healthcare providers. They expect a support addressing to the infants, feeding choice from healthcare providers, but this is not always met, as we will see later. This is an example what occurs, for example, with the maternal habits and attitude in relation to breastfeeding and formula feed. This is a Brazilian papers that show some curios. In Brazil, we have a lot of mothers during the first year of the children's life, that if he cannot support breastfeeds, give whole cow's milk. This, we know, is inappropriate for many reasons. And this is very interesting because during the first life, almost 94% of the mothers give this whole cow's milks. And why this occurs? Who recommends this? It's not pediatrician, grandmother, and the family and friends, they have some influence in this, but we can see that is not the most what occurs. And it's very curious that nobody has recommended whole cow milk in the infant nutrition in the first years of life. And why occurs that? Where does the source of information for the mother or caregivers and family come from? As we see, from the family, friends, from internet, now groups of mothers by WhatsApp application, blogs related to infant feeding that are sometimes not managed by health professionals. And of course, you have the healthcare providers' recommendation guides, but this is not always what they follow. But why do mothers look for information other than the health professional, the healthcare providers? Well, one of the reasons is the maternal anxiety. There is a feeling of belonging to a group with the same concerns. Then blogs, WhatsApp groups. Mothers see that if she is not an excellent mother, as Winnicott said in an occasion, she can be a good mom because the concerns are always the same for the mother group. There is another reason that the mother trusts in the experience of family and friends. This for generation to generation, what the grandmother do, what the mother do with the nutrition, she must follow for the best nutrition of her child. But otherwise, many parents consider inadequate nutritional counseling by the health professional. For this reason, reduced time of the consultation and lack of due attention to the importance of nutritional aspects, cultural and regional eating habits, that maybe the family has this conscience about this, to not understand the emotional state of the mother, her anxieties about feeding her child correctly. And this is really a problem. And the question is, how can the healthcare providers deal with these behaviors? Well, the beginning. The first of all is to do a prenatal visit. This prenatal visit can be made face-to-face or by internet, for example, for telemedicine during more or less 32-week gestation. And what are the objectives? What we want with this prenatal visit? First of all, to provide a foundation on which to build a positive family pediatric professional partnership, to access pertinent aspects of the past obstetric and present prenatal history, like some genetic or chromosomal disorders. Have a window to introduce anticipatory guidance about early infant care and infant safety practice. And this explains the benefits of breast milk. Identify psychosocial factors, for example, perinatal depression, anxiety, that may affect family function and family adjustment to the newborn. Then this consultation, in my point of view, is very important. This is the relation between the family, the parents. You can have a good seed to have a good relation after birth. Another important issue is the guide in motherhood. There is some concerns in the first feeding, skin-to-skin contact, descent of milk, flat and inverted nozzles, then lactation guidance by the pediatrician, obstetrician, nurse is very important on guide on breast care and even at discharge outpatient follow-up. And this follow-up, we have some important key points. Of course, after birth, regular face-to-face consultation during the first year of life with healthcare providers, pediatrician, or similar, are of fundamental importance in order to provide nutritional counseling. Parents expect from healthcare providers who they consult individualized guides on infant feeding since pregnancy, lactation, complementary, and transition to family foods even up to 2 years, and even until we are with the children and adolescents. And finally, nutritional guidance by healthcare providers is of paramount importance to monitor and ensure growth and adequate cognitive development of the infant, and to initiate, this is very important, healthy eating habits that will accompany the individual through all the cycle of the life. Well, this conference, role of healthcare providers, have a publication now that you can see in Behavior Science. This is a new publication, and all what we comment you can find in this publication. And in this month, in the Nestlé Nest, that we have this issue as a special number. I want to thank Nestlé Nutrition Institute for the invitation, and thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Now we are live and online to a session to question and answers. And I want to greet Professor Stuart Forsyth from Scotland and Dr. Ming Kui from Florida that will answer the questions you can send as indicated in the screen. I want to thank Nestlé Nutrition Institute for this kind invitation. And today, after the presentation, we have a lot of questions about the modern parenting and how can healthcare professionals manage this in these new times, especially with this COVID pandemic that change some practice for all professionals of health. We have here a lot of questions, and one of that is for me. One question, very interesting, is how parents tend to trust their family advice on how to raise their children. How improve trust between the healthcare professionals and the parents? Well, this is not a new question. First of all, we have to do a good relationship. The trust, the link we have between parents and even with relatives, grandfather, grandmother, is most important. And this begins for the pediatrician with a prenatal consultation. This is very interesting and is happening many times in my country, in Brazil, because today, with the internet, with the telemedicine, we have the occasion to improve this relationship before the delivery of the children. And of course, after that is important the commitment and responsibility of the professional to give all the assistance family needs. There is another question that is addressed to Dr. Ming Kui. And the answer is that parenting was never easy. How do you see parenting today different from the past? There is any difference. Today, we have more pressure on parents' increase in the last years. And you can explain this, what happens?
You are muted. Yeah.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, absolutely. Parenting have changed dramatically over time. During the old times, Greece and Rome, to Middle Age and Renaissance, all the way to the Europe and colonial American, when there are only two life stage. There's a childhood and then there's adulthood. And childhood ended at age 5 to 7. And children are regarded as a cheap source of cheap labor. So parents' responsibility is limited, and children learn from observing their parents. And their parents, the priority is to survive, providing food and shelter. And over time, parenting has changed because of the resources. And now we're more focused on education. And parents invest heavily into education and forming intimate relationship with their child. And there's all kinds of parenting in terms of styles, from those very harsh physical punishment all the way to permissive parenting. And also with the diversity nowadays, there are families of divorce, there's single parent families, remarriage, step families. So what we can say now is we have more diversity in parenting. And now we also have increased pressure. On one hand is because the more resources, fewer children, parents are investing more on the fewer children, and they want them to succeed. And on the other hand, there's a social norm, of the intensive parenting. At the same time, there's the technology advancement that keeping parents closely connected with their children all the time. And also, at least in the US, over 50% of the parents, both parents work full-time, which means they have to juggle between family and work, the work-family balance. So we see an increase in parenting pressure, and that is definitely influencing children nowadays more.
Thank you, Ming. And there is another question that's addressed for me. Considering the digital world, the telemedicine, and the social restrictions due to COVID, do you see higher pressure for parents? Yes, this is a very important question in those days, because of course, they cannot have a face-to-face consultation. This is quite different as the usual, but the telemedicine, no doubt, and all the internet and the webinars, they help too much. They help too much in those days, because the restriction will be not total. We can talk with parents, they can talk with the caregivers, give information, and many times it's not only the problems with your children, with feeding, but the emotional problems that we must lead in these days. And of course, there is a high pressure for the parents, for anxiety, for even social economics problems. And the telemedicine, it's a good way because it's cheap or free of charge. You can do it in anywhere, in any place. And this, of course, I think was a very good help in these days, very difficult days we live now. Well, there is a question to Professor Stewart. Professor, what do you think about the literature guideline is still focusing or targeting mothers as primary caregiver without acknowledging fathers as co-parents, single parents? What do you think about this?
Well, I think that, as Ming was saying, the diversity of parenthood has increased in recent times. I think that in many countries, the father is much more involved in the care of the child. In many ways, even changing nappies, feeding the child, and also supporting the household in general, as the mother, in many cases nowadays, has also got a job to do, as well as providing parenting duties. And so I think that in many countries, there has been an evolution towards both parents contributing to the care of the child, both parents contributing to the care of the house and doing the shopping and the other domestic duties that are required. And I think that is welcomed. I think that clearly this has not happened in all countries, but I think as these countries evolve into more modern day, higher economic countries, then these changes will happen there as well. So I think that I would certainly support both parents being actively involved. I think it's good for the child. I think it's good for the household in general.
Thank you, Stuart. Now there is a question to Dr. Ming. What do you think is the impact of the difficulties of being a parent today on the child? And I want to complement with your talk about hyper-parenting that you talk about with the father and the mother. What are the consequences on this?
Absolutely. Well, parents influence children in multiple ways. No one of them is from direct observing their parents. For example, facing difficulties, parents' drinking problems, drug problems, or their marital problems, parents, and then children can observe that, and that has a negative impact. A second way is the direct impact. For example, facing difficulties, parents practice hostile parenting, abusive parenting, neglectful parenting that directly impact children. And then there's the spillover hypothesis, which means when parents have emotional problems, physical problems, marital problems, the negativity can spill over to their parenting and parent-child relationship, which influence children. For example, the family stress model, especially during now the COVID, many families face economic hardship. And that hardship influence generate economic pressure. And that pressure will influence marital and parenting relationship, which ultimately influence child. And also, we can't overlook a child's problem that affect parenting, which is a reciprocal influence, and that create a negative cycle if parents have difficulties and child also have problems. And it's also worth noting that this relationship and difficulties are impacting children. They impact children of all developmental stages, not just infant, not just child, but also adolescents and young adults. In terms of hyperparenting, sometimes when parents overfunction, children underfunction. That means parents are doing everything and they prevent their children the opportunity to learn. Therefore, in terms of their self-efficacy, their confidence, their problem-solving abilities, as a result, all reduce. And that will pose problems for the child in the long term.
Yes, thank you, Ming. This is a problem, the hyper-parenting, even in all countries. There is a question to Stuart. How to better prepare future parents considering the pressures and frustrations of the world today?
Well, that's a good question. I think that parents are probably in many cases not prepared for parenthood. and when it happens, they find it extremely stressful. So I think it's really important that there is as good preparation as possible for them taking over the responsibility for a young child and continue to support that child throughout their life. I think that obviously extended family are very important in this. I think that young parents in particular are dependent upon their own parents to help them initially and to support them in terms of the feeding of the child and then the future care and supervision. I think that, again, it depends on the circumstances of the family in terms of the social circumstances, what are the needs of the family in general. And I think that if they're from a poor background, then I think social services and health services need to be closely involved to help them during the initial period of childhood and also as the child grows up in terms of their future education and future health. Clearly, also, there comes a time when they need to decide about employment of the father and employment of the mother. And I think that is also can be a difficult time for parents to decide how to approach this. I think today in many countries, as I said earlier, the mother is working, and in some cases she may also be the main income generator within the family. And so in those situations, the father has to take on more responsibility for the care of the child. And so there are a number of challenges which do need to be thought through. There also need to fall upon the support from, I say, extended family members, and also they may need to look at financial support in some families so that the child can be engaged in other child activities, which I think are very important for child development as well. And then, of course, in later life, later childhood, there's new difficulties that may present in terms from a parenting point of view. And so I think one of the messages that parents need to recognize is that you're always a parent as long as you're alive. And therefore you will be involved in supporting your children throughout the time you are able to do so.
Thank you, Stuart. Very interesting. There is another question that's to me in the line of the internet again. And the question is, in the era of WhatsApp groups and social media, is it more challenging to have parents follow the guidance from healthcare professionals? This is a very interesting question because it's like a knife with two cut edge. You have a good size and not a so good size. For a good size for the mother is very interesting because all the mother, they want to be not a good mother, but an excellent mother, as Winnicott said. But the reality is different. And when mother come to the WhatsApp group with other mothers, she can see that the problems are not only problems with her child, but are common problems. And this for the anxiety can lower the level of anxiety. This is interesting. But in the other side, there is a problem because these groups, they have their own opinion, or each mother have opinion what to do with a problem with her child. For example, if have colics, I give this medication. If have some allergic problem, I give this formula. That in most cases is not appropriate for the individualized case of the child. And this, of course, must be filtered by the healthcare professional, by the pediatrician, by the dietitian, and this must be put in the room. The social media is another kind of this kind of problem. Maybe could be a good information, maybe not, because many groups or something we can see in internet can be run by a society, a medical society with good answers, but many are not, are managed by not health professionals and can give a wrong information and even some fake news. That's a problem with internet. Internet is democratic, is international, is global, but we don't have regulation. We must filter all this information. And of course, another thing is how the professional is prepared to do. I grow in an analogic world, and now with the digital world, it's not easy to manage this. We must know some technical, we must know how to present, how to talk in internet, and this is a learning, a long learning that not had an end. There is another question to Dr. Ming, is from Dr. Muhammad Javed from Pakistan, and is very interesting because he is asking about what the best age and way of parenting. This is there a best age to be a parent today? Because mothers are very small family, and mothers, they have most of them, they work a lot and do a career in the work, and is not for many years ago that two young women have a child. But now, how can you see this, the age and way of parenting in this modern time?
Yes. Well, it's rather hard to say. It depends on a lot of factors, not just the physical condition. We know that for a younger age, for example, teenage pregnancy and childbirth and parenting, there are more problems because teenagers are children themselves. They haven't finished school, and most likely they're absent fathers, and they miss out on their own childhood, which we sometimes call it a truncated childhood. And they don't have the emotional maturity to take care of their child. And they may have to drop out of school, and they don't have that parenting experience that older mother have. And they don't have the economic stability. So a lot of problems associated with a teenage parent and teenage parenting. In early 20s, in terms of fertility, physically, there are fewer problems with pregnancy and childbirth. And women in early 20s are physically in prime. And when they have children, they're more likely to have more energy and play together. But at the same time, in today's society, being in early 20s, likely you have less resources. You're economically not well established. So, even though physically this is the prime, however, from a social, psychological perspective, this may be also, in my opinion, can be difficult because of the social, the economic factors. Late 20s to early 30s, this is the time when maturity level, the mature enough, relationship-wise pretty stable. We know that the age of first marriage is in late 20s now. So there's a stable relationship. They're more economically established. And this could be the best time because physically, you still have the energy, and financially well-established, relationship-wise, relatively stable relationship. Above 40s, fertility reduce, energy level reduce, even though financially may be better off. So there's always a consideration of multiple factors. It's not really fixed. And also it depends on a lot of other factors. For example, do you have family support? Do you have your working place and support? Just like we said about, many parents now work full time. And do you have the financial resilience? So a lot of factors can actually influence this and make some mothers, even in difficult times, and maybe resilient. So for example, teenage mothers, and we say that they face a lot of challenges, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're doomed, because if they have social support and if they can finish their education, we know that two factors that lead to successful later life is one is the economic establishment, and the second one is a stable, supportive relationship. So if the teenage mothers can get their education and can find a supportive partner, and they actually end very well. So it doesn't necessarily mean teenage mothers are doomed. However, depends on a lot of factors, and some mothers, despite the difficulties, can be very resilient. In terms of best way to parenting, in my earlier talk, I mentioned about in a general rule, it is responsible parenting. However, there's no one best parenting practice. There's no one size fits all. And that's what's the key message from the parenting index, is that it influenced by a lot of factors from multiple levels, the macro level all the way to the micro level. So especially, in terms of in parenting realm, it depends on a lot of factors, and we say there is no one size fits all. But in general, the rule of thumb is to be responsible and responsive.
Thank you, Ming. Very interesting. There are a lot of questions. I want to join to Dr. Stewart. One of that's from Cedric Asani. He asks about, in the modern world we are living, families are now more nucleated. Father and mother and other relatives are not participate too much today in the family education and the child education or feeding. How then do we achieve the societal responsibility in parenting? And in complementation, is there any impact in the societal responsibility, of course, other than infant feeding, like policies and maternity leave parents face? What do you think about this, Stuart?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think it is an issue for parents. I think that the nuclear family is very small, tight family, and it can present difficulties. I think that, as we've already touched upon, parents today are more likely to be working and bringing in income to the family, so that offers benefits to the family as a whole. But it can interfere with what would in the past be normal parenting, where there's parents and there'll be grandparents available, etc. So I think that it is a problem, and the way today's parents appear to be helping to resolve that issue is that they are involving their very young children often in going to nurseries and to playgroups, so the children themselves are experiencing social behaviors of other children. They're in the company of other adults, and they're also to a certain extent receiving early education as well. So that is certainly one way that parents today have addressed the issue of them not always being available as their own parents may have been for them in the past. I think that in terms of the second part of your question, talking about other areas of supporting families, and the question included it included support for maternity leave, and of course nowadays in some countries the governments are offering paternity leave as well, and I think that is obviously of great benefit to the parents and to their children. One of the issues, of course, is that usually it is the mother who spends most time on leave, and that can have an impact on the mother's career and further training and education and promotion, for example. So that these are new challenges that the modern family need to face. So the family needs to balance, as I said, parents' ambitions, their career ambitions. It needs to balance income generation for the family. And of course, it then needs to, of course, balance the needs of their own children. And this can be challenging, but I think that the options are available in many countries. But of course, in many countries, these opportunities are not available. And that does lead to the questions of therefore there may be families who suffer from poverty because of lack of income coming into the family. And the poverty then presents other problems in relation to the health and well-being of children. So my answer is that yes, it is changing and will continue to evolve. And it's important that parents are given the best advice, that they make the best decisions for them as a family, but always, I think, putting the importance of the care and responsibility of their children to the center of the discussions.
Thank you, Stuart. There are three questions for me related to the internet, and they are very interesting. One of that is if we can recommend the use of social media as a way of educating modern parents. Another, what is the role of the healthcare professionals and including a dietitian, for example, in this prenatal consultation? Well, I think this, not this modern times, of course, no doubt that we have a very strong tool that is internet, the good information, the relationship with the healthcare professional, a pediatrician, a dietitian, and all the recommendation we can do to increase, to promote, for example, breastfeeding during pregnancy, some questions during lactation, and we have a simple, easy way to have a media communication that is very fast and easy in our screen. And this, of course, if we have a good use with the internet tool, I think this is very important. It's another media we have to education, of course, no limits to this. There is three questions to Dr. Ming, very interesting about the relatives. Do you think grandparents are not worthy to give adequate supplementary rights to new parents? This is the question of family trust from generation. This, I think, in all over the world, the trust in the grandparents and relatives is very important, but not always the right information. What do you think? How manage this, Ming?
Well, let me just say that grandparents play a very important role. They are very worthy. Financially, a lot of the grandparents can be able to help a lot. Instrumentally, they can help out. For example, when both parents are working, they can send their children, their grandparents can do some childcare responsibility. And children get a chance to have quality time with their grandparents, which is another very important aspect for child development. For grandparents, they get to spend time with their grandchildren. And however, they also have their own limitations, a physical limitation, maybe financially taking a toll. And also sometimes grandparents take on a major role. For example, when the parents are having some problems, for example, drug problems, or in prison, or the death of the parents. In that situation, sometimes grandparents, in order to want to keep their grandchildren, they would like to take on the parent role. So when grandparents sometimes can become the parents, of course, they lose their role as a grandparent. However, they take on the primary parenting role. And also, I would like to add that there is great cultural difference. In some countries, grandparents may be just weekend or during summer break or not taking on as an important role. However, in some countries, grandparents are very much involved. And in some places where grandparents have a very strong influence on how the parents should parent, and especially in cultures where there's a hierarchy that grandparents have high authority, and they not only are worthy, they're actually important, and they not actually just providing guidance, they're actually doing the actual parenting and helping with parenting with the instrumental help as well as financial help. So grandparents, very important. Depending on different situations, they can be the grandparents, they can be the parents, and there's great cultural variation.
Very nice, thank you. I'm happy we don't have enough time to other questions. I want to thank again the panelists, Professor Stuart Forsythe, Dr. Ming Cui, and a special acknowledgement to Nestlé Nutrition Institute for this very interesting panel, the presentation we have today. Have a good time and goodbye. Thank you for your presentation and thank you to watch this webinar.